Hello and welcome back to Give Me the Remote. This is episode 3 on the 21st of May 2018. My name is John and I am joined by my co-host Sheridan.
Hi.
And what are we talking about first tonight, Sheridan?
We're going to talk about WestWorld Season 2.
WestWorld Season 2, or just WestWorld in general, I think is the idea.
Okay, let's go with that.
Because we don't plan to watch WestWorld Season 2, do we?
Probably not yet. I'm feeling as though it's fallen off the radar a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, we struggled with WestWorld, didn't we? I mean, we put... Because in Australia, to get WestWorld legally, you need a subscription called Foxtel, which is really expensive. It's like 5 times the cost of Netflix. So we have it on for watching other things, mostly Game of Thrones, and then we're like, okay, well, you know, Game of Thrones is once a week. WestWorld's really good. Everyone keeps talking about it. And we struggled through season 1. We left it alone for weeks and then we'd come back and
it's really hard to find your spot if you're watching a streaming service that doesn't just start up where you left off, because they repeat so many scenes over and over. You're like, have I seen this one?
And look, let's come to our first real criticism of WestWorld. The friggin' multiple timelines.
Oh yeah, it's very confusing. You cannot watch this show casually.
But the whole thing is set, well, in a future which has a theme park, which is the Old West. So most of the action is in period costume. So, okay, we're in Ye Olde West simulation time frame stuff. And then you've got 2 different bloody timelines running. With no explanation, no dates. They don't put anything in the credits. You're just meant to guess that one is before the other, and it takes, half the show before it kind of starts to sink in that maybe they're in different timelines.
Yeah, and so you do get this feeling of like, hang on, have I already watched this episode before?
And some of the characters are the same.
Yeah.
Across the timelines, and some of them aren't. So it's deliberately obtuse, I would go so far as to say.
Yeah.
And I have no greater condemnation of anything than to be deliberately obtuse. We'd have to be breaking out the 4-letter words and getting the explicit tag on this podcast for that. So it's deliberately confusing and difficult to get into. For a while, you thought they was being shrunk down to be miniature people.
I did. I thought I was shrunk down to put this miniature world. I think that was more a problem with me, though, than the actual narrative of the show. My sort of imagination had gone a little bit too crazy there.
Yeah, it does look pretty.
It does look very pretty. I think one of my other problems with it is that because they are these robots, they're essentially, even though they, obviously develop consciousness and that's part of the whole narrative, at the end of the day, they are robots, so you kind of don't really care about them that much.
And they're robots who every time they're killed will be brought back as well.
Yeah, so I'm just like...
And I've got a big problem as well. Like, okay, artificial intelligence, that's one wildly difficult technology. Robotic human simulating motion is actually a totally different problem. Also very hard to solve. Nowhere near it in today's technology. And the world, as it appears, looks very similar to our today, and yet these 2 wildly advanced technologies are being used to run a sex farm.
Yeah, which is essentially what it is.
And that's not actually my biggest problem, although it's definitely one of them. It's this idea they've got in the show that the robots can't shoot the humans. They can point their guns at them and they go bang, but somehow they're not hurt. But when they shoot the same guns at each other and go bang, great big holes get blown in them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And the actual characters in the show that are human, you're led to believe at certain points during the series, or season 1, are they even human? Maybe this one's a robot.
Is anyone human?
And
Which is a nice question. I mean, I kind of like that.
Yeah, same. But at the same time, I'm like, well, if no one's human, I don't really care about any of them.
I think the idea is you're supposed to come to care for the
robots.
robots.
Well, yeah, I didn't see. They failed. They're not very likeable characters.
See, I kind of do like that the more the robots become self-aware, the less likeable they become. I think that's actually kind of nifty that there's an alien nature which you would expect from a robotic intelligence. Fundamentally their brains aren't the same as ours, and even if you took humans and put them through the experience these robots have got, because there's this conceit that they're not getting their brains properly wiped between every time they get horribly raped and murdered by the humans. So they're getting raped and murdered in their own consciousness over and over again by these humans who will obliterate them if they ever realise they're self-aware. Yeah, boy, I would be pretty angry about my captors and torturers.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, the whole of the WestWorld system is how can we make artificial intelligence so angry that it will try and murder us all. And season 2 seems to be starting to explore this bit of an uprising. Maybe they're getting back in control of it.
Yeah, well, Maeve, the character played by Thady Newton, she is probably, to me, the most interesting character out of all of them, and becomes more likeable as she becomes more human. I mean, she becomes this pretty kick-ass kind of character.
Yeah, whereas Dolores, the beautiful blonde, just becomes more cold and detached. Yeah, although, she seems to cop a lot of the worst of
she
human
definitely
behaviour
does.
as well as the approachable
Although I think
girl.
Maeve as the madam probably did cop a fair bit of hard times herself.
Yeah, but as a madam, I don't know, there was more a negotiable framework for, whereas the farm girl stereotype was copying just everyone's a lot of horrible fantasies.
True.
And then we just get back to, hang on, wait a minute, we've created artificial intelligence and living robots. Is really the best we can do creating a sex farm?
It does seem to be. And also, why one in the Wild West? I guess they must have other sex farms that we don't see.
Well, I want to see those other sex farms.
Yeah.
Or maybe one that isn't a sex farm. So I guess it's always left me wanting to know more about this world that it's supposedly set in. And I guess I have a problem with Westerns. I just don't find them as appealing as some people really love. The romance of the Wild West. It's not even a history. It's a romance. I love the idea of wild open skies and undiscovered countries and being free of all the assholes who clog down our lives.
Yeah, well, that does not happen in WestWorld.
No,
that's a lot of assholes.
Wall-to-wall assholes. Anyway, so look, we did watch season 1 and we've watched one episode of season 2.
I feel like this
long.
show... Yeah, they are.
So long.
I feel like this show's gone a bit like how Lost did. The TV show Lost.
Well, when they started bringing the boats up the beaches,
and you just sort of like, you get to this point where you're watching it and you're like, hang on, I don't even really know what's happening anymore. It just looks good and there's a lot of drama, but...
Nudity, some good nudity.
Yeah, I don't remember the nudity.
It's mostly bodies on slabs, I guess, waiting to be reanimated.
Well. Showing your own special kind of kink there.
There's a whole other kink going on there, yeah.
Well, if you... Oh, we should rate this one.
Are we done talking about it?
I think so.
So anyway, look, Jesus. Basically, I don't think this is very good. And also, Anthony Hopkins' character is just Anthony Hopkins being Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, totally.
He's not even acting anymore.
He's not even in season 2 either.
I think he died at the end of season 1, but it's so hard to care.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give this 1 star. I'm going to say WestWorld is a diabolical waste of your time.
Oh, wow. I'm going to give it 2.
2. What got it a 2nd star?
I think because I did persevere with the full first season.
Yeah, is that our standard?
What's my standard? You can have whatever standard you want.
This podcast is still young. We're still figuring all that out. Okay. So what's next?
I think it's a good segue into Wild Wild Country if we're talking about...
From the Wild West to the Wild Country.
Yeah, crazy community living out in the Wild West of America.
So what is Wild Wild Country?
So Wild Wild Country is a documentary about the Rajneeshis, who were some would say cult, others would say alternative community that existed from probably about, the late 70s through to the 90s?
Well, Rajneesh got started in the 60s in India, and one of the problems I have with this documentary is they don't actually talk. They don't reveal a lot about what the Rajneeshis were really about. They're like, oh, there's lots of them. They all seem very happy. They love each other. They say they love each other until they hate each other. But they don't talk about what they actually believed. And what they believed was very fluid. Because for a while they were saying they were a religion to gain the benefits of being a religion in the United States legal system. And then when the government started hitting them with the anti-establishment clause, suddenly they're like, oh, we're not a religion at all. So their beliefs can be extremely disposable.
Yeah, but that is, I guess, probably some of the issues with this documentary is it doesn't have time to explore all of the depths.
I feel they might have had time.
Well, it doesn't have time to explore all of the complexities of this organisation, which was very subversive. And just because they say at one point they're not a religion doesn't mean that's actually what they thought. They were just trying to get a benefit from it. I mean, ultimately they're anti-establishment organisation.
I mean, so it's a documentary, and as a documentary piece of storytelling, I mean, this is one of the things I love about Netflix, because it used to be a documentary couldn't be bigger than 2 hours, and I mean, this sucker weighs in around, 6 hours long? 6 episodes?
I reckon it's longer than that.
Anyway,
yeah, it's a chunk.
A long piece of documentary storytelling, and I can't, aside from, I guess, Making a Murder, and Netflix is doing more of these things, but I don't recall anything like it, unless you count maybe The World at War with Laurence Olivier narrating it from the 1980s, which was a 20-hour documentary. But, World War II is quite a big subject.
Yeah. No, Netflix is invigorating documentary filmmaking for sure.
Yeah. And one thing I love about this is with every interview or every segment of interview, the pacing of the storytelling, you keep thinking, oh, the government are the baddies, and then you jump to, oh, the Rajneeshis are the baddies, and then you're back to, no, wait a minute, the Rajneeshis are the goodies, and the government are the baddies, and the Hicks who live in Antelope, Oregon, they're the baddies. Yeah. No, wait a minute, they're the goodies, the Rajneeshis are the baddies.
And the great thing about it too is the fact that they have this original footage from the 80s, and then they're interviewing people from both sides in the current modern day. So you have these townspeople who their town gets overtaken by this Rajneeshi community, and they're, at one point you're on their side, you understand, and then they're the outsiders, and who do you actually... There's no one to root for in this documentary. You actually do see both perspectives.
Yeah, so just in the human storytelling, it's amazing. Some of the history of it is also quite mind-boggling. Here in Australia, there was a little bit of talk about the Orange people.
I think in Perth they were quite active.
Yeah, well, Perth always goes for weird cults.
Just alienated the entire...
That's fine. But, I mean, they love their weird cults. They know. They're fine. So... Where are we getting to with this show? I mean, some of the stuff is just astonishing. The way the Rajneeshis, they had a lot of lawyers who were part of the scene. They always had a lot of resources. I mean, they always kept showing how Bhagwan Rajneesh is running around in his 22, 23, 24 Rolls Royces. Yeah. And I think he really was overdoing it with the Rolls Royces. If you really want to alienate people,
agree. The Rolls...
swank around in a Rolls Royce and everyone will hate you.
And that is a little, like you've already said at the beginning, is that is a problem with it, is you kind of don't really understand what the Rajneeshis are about. Because they just sort of say, oh, well, there's these people, they're full of free love and want to live this communal lifestyle. But then they talk a lot about the Rolls Royces, and you're like, but how are these people in this community tolerating all these Rolls Royces?
But Rolls Royces and helicopters and planes. And I mean, I did love the stuff where the locals in Antelope thought they could scare the Rajneeshis off by firing their guns from their pickup trucks at their commune. And then the Rajneeshis go and build a firing range and bring in a truckload of guns and start practicing their firearms, in front of the terrified residents of Antelope. And they're like, oh. If we want to go to violence, these guys can really bring it. And that was cool, and things like the locals trying to intimidate the Rajneeshis from their pickup trucks, and suddenly a helicopter comes over the hill, and orange people come out with their guns and say, "What are you doing?" So, I mean, I'm a little pro Rajneesh in parts.
Same. Well, that's the thing. You at some points you were like, these people have built an amazing community. I want to live there, and then at other times you're like, you guys are complete assholes that really have just taken over these poor people's community in Oregon and
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of weird little conflicts due to little weirdnesses of the American legal system. So they turn up with a commune, and they're building on their own private land a community, and then they've got a couple of thousand people living there. And of course, the town of Antelope, population 50, is not set up to deal with 2,000 people living in its municipality. Things like sewerage. Things like apparently a big source of conflict was garbage disposal, because the local tip was set up for 50 people and suddenly got 2,000 people dumping their garbage on them. So that created a lot of stress, and then the Rajneeshis responded by taking over, because 2,000 people, you got 50 people voting in your local council elections. Hello, this town. Well, they literally renamed the town from Antelope to Rajneesh.
I know. And they took over their little diner and made it into a vegan cafe, which I have to say, I'm not against vegan food, but that's pretty mean.
It is. But the really interesting was, once they had control of a town, they had control of a sheriff's office. Yeah. Which gave them access to uniforms and firearms, and a legally deputised force. Also access to the computer databases of law enforcement, which they were definitely using. They talk about how they were using them, which becomes quite terrifying when you've got this religious cult that's in control of a police force and able to look up things. I assume they could do wiretaps if they wanted to.
Well, that is one of the things that they were actually charged with doing illegally. And that is the interesting story about how once they got all this power, they became themselves quite corrupted in exercising that power.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I love that there's a lot of really interesting human beings being interviewed, particularly the Rajneeshis.
I know. I want to know more, though, about how they got there.
Yeah.
How did these... Because most of them are very educated. And this is... I mean, today in Australia, almost everyone has a uni degree. We're all quite educated. But this was, 20, 30 years ago. Not everyone had that kind of privilege. And these people these were lawyers and all sorts of professionals that gave up all of their worldly possessions to go and live in this community. But you kind of want to know why?
Yeah. It probably asks more questions than answers the whole show. Yeah. And there is an element of, there is talk that the Rajneeshis introduced MDMA to America. That is not covered in the show at all.
Well, they don't cover anything about their drug use, or even there's references to them being free love, but they didn't believe in marriage. There was quite open kind of sexual.
I'm told by reading Wikipedia that Bhagwan Rajneesh was actually a incredibly funny guy, and it was the sense of humour he brought to his philosophy that a lot of people found appealing. And they show none of that in the show. There's not one joke.
Well, for most of the story that they cover, he's actually silent. Yeah.
But anyway, so look, without delving, I think, too deeply into all the twists and turns of the show, I'd just say it's a really interesting little bit of history that I had largely forgotten about, and was very poorly covered at the time by news. And I mean, it's hilarious watching all the old news footage.
Oh no,
and the unbelievable inherent racism.
Oh, definitely. But most of the followers were white.
Yeah, but the inherent racism of it, and things like, I mean, the Rajneeshis, to build up their voting base when they were moving on from taking the town to taking over the county, they said, we'll house and feed any homeless person. And suddenly they were knee-deep in homeless people. And then the second they gave up that political campaign, they turfed them all out of the streets of rural Oregon. Yeah. Which is a brutal way to say screw you today. Yeah, look, interesting show, interesting people. I thought, it was funny seeing these little old women.
I don't think anyone could describe Sheila as a little old woman ever.
Well, Sheila today is a little old woman.
But she's fierce.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, she's mellowed a lot. Because when they showed me the old footage of Sheila, I mean, she was a killer.
I reckon she's still got it,
She was literally a killer. She was. But a lot of the other little old ladies who, and they're being interviewed in the lovely libraries of their obviously lovely homes.
I know, all these people seem to have a lot of money.
Oh, and then I tried to assassinate the district attorney. And I did 15 years in federal prison for it.
I know.
look, it's a good piece of storytelling. It's a great piece of history. I would say you definitely want to hit up Wikipedia and do a bit of your own research to follow some of the loose ends that the documentary makers, for their own reasons, which are probably various. Partly, I think they just want to keep the great piece of storytelling going. Partly, it's already a very long documentary. Yeah. I would give this. I'd go as high as 5 stars.
Yeah, I'd go 5 stars on this too. First 5 stars.
Whoa! Woo! Okay. So what's next?
Well, I'm going to talk about The Danish Girl. Which
The Danish Girl.
You didn't watch.
No, I've been away. I'm very throaty because I've been shouting at people at a beer festival for 3 days.
Or perhaps drinking and shouting at a beer festival.
Well, I did the shouting, then I did the drinking. And when I say shouting at people, I was doing safety briefings for a roller racing tournament in the middle of a beer festival, which also someone had a heart attack. I forgot to tell you about that.
Wow.
Yeah, apparently we saved his life. If he hadn't had the heart attack in a controlled environment.
Oh, he could have had it just at home on his own.
That's right.
Wow. Did you get a beer for that?
No. And we wanted to send him beer, but he's probably not allowed to have beer.
Yeah, he's probably not allowed to have beer.
Moving on, what do we got?
So, The Danish Girl, which I'm not actually sure if this is new to Netflix, as it was made in 2015, but I hadn't really noticed it coming up on my suggested until this weekend. So I thought everyone raved about it.
On the couch on your own, just filling in time with Netflix.
I thought, what movie will I watch that John might not be interested in?
And you're trying to enhance your cred with the algorithm.
I am trying to enhance my cred with the algorithm because as anyone who's in a long-term relationship knows, if you let your boyfriend always watch the good shows on his Netflix account, which, you know, you shouldn't do, ladies, Netflix seems to think you're a complete fucking idiot. So you are suggested with shows, if you're... I'm just using a hypothetical example, but you might be suggested with a lot of reality TV and or things that are soap operas.
Reality TV and soap operas, though?
Only occasionally, but if they're all you watch, that's all Netflix thinks you want to see. So you got to up the credentials by watching things like The Danish Girl.
Okay, what's it about?
So The Danish Girl is billed as being a true story about someone named Ina Wagner. Sorry, I just have horrid pronunciation of anything beyond bogan Australian. Who was a Danish man and transitioned to become Lily in, I think it was around the 1920s.
Also a very early.
Very early. So,
well, documented transgender. There is a school of thought that people have been gender fluid and transgender throughout history. Just no one made too much of a fuss about it.
That's right. So she is one of the very first people to have had gender reassignment surgery, and that ultimately, this is not a spoiler because she's a real person, killed her. She had a transplant for an ovary, and her body rejected it. They were really
pushing the envelope back
then,
they don't do that anymore, do they?
I don't believe so. It seemed as though the practice was to try and put in all of the female sex organs at that time.
Hormone therapy probably wasn't as well advanced.
I don't think so. So I don't know the medical reasons why that was all happening, but she did ultimately die, and so it's about her story. She was a painter and was married to Gerda, who's very well played by Alicia Vikander, who I think she did win a Best Supporting Actress Oscar, even though she's in 50... For this role, even though she's in 50% of the movie, which does make you wonder why she's not Best Actress. But anyway, I think there was some controversy about that.
Why does Hollywood still do supporting actor and actress when we are in fact supposed to refer to all actors as actors, regardless of their gender?
I don't know
the
answer to that.
Is it the patriarchy?
Everything's the patriarchy, if I don't know the answer to it. Moving on. Someone can perhaps tell us in some comments why that's the case. So it is about their story as a married couple and Lily's transition. Eddie Redmayne is probably...
He does a lot of weird roles, doesn't he?
Well, he's a stretch actor, I guess you'd call him. He pushes himself.
He's the go-to guy for funny-looking people in funny-looking roles.
He's very good in this movie.
Yeah, right.
In fact, he's definitely by far and away the best thing about this film. I mean, I can't speak for the transgender community, but I did feel as though some of what was portrayed in the film was perhaps a little bit glossing over the trans experience. There was a lot of, let's just put Eddie in a pretty dress and watch him trying to apply lipstick, and I'm not sure that kind of dealt with the complexity of what it's like to transition.
To be fair, we know a fairly significant number of trans people. And for the men transitioning to being women, applying makeup is actually one of the hardest parts of the whole process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. It felt a little superficial at times that...
And for women going the other way, it's about learning to wear black socks. But, you know...
Especially given the time that this movie's set in is... And I mean... So they do move to Paris in the 1920s, and that was obviously an extremely liberal period in Parisian life. There was quite a lot of acceptability of homosexuality and all sorts of...
Oh, I mean, in small parts of Paris.
Yes, and they were in an art scene, and it would have been a lot easier for them than in other places.
Yeah, I mean, France is a deeply Catholic country with a significant rural community.
Yes.
And,
so I guess my point is they didn't really address any of that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, there was quite a bit of, I guess, portrayal of him going to see psychologists and psychiatrists, and I'm not, they didn't really go into the in-depth of what that actually would have been like, which is what he would have really, he at the time...
Don't go dead naming.
He... At the time,
to keep it gender neutral,
he would have faced a lot of difficulty from being, basically put in a psychiatric ward.
Yeah, right.
That would have genuinely been something that would have been an issue. And they sort of gloss over that a bit. But, she was a very significant person in history, and I think it is... an amazing story that needs to be told. It is actually, oddly, she is a real person, but the movie is based on a fictional book about her life.
God, okay, it's getting confusing.
So there's a lot of poetic license, basically.
Is there any mention made at all that there are significant transgender traditions in non-white cultures that go back thousands of years?
Well, no, but that's not the culture that this film is set in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, a bit of whitewashing going on too.
Yes, I hadn't thought about that. That's right. But yes, it's I found it an enjoyable movie. It's very... I mean, there's definitely some highly charged emotional scenes that... Yeah, so I think this is actually a really important story, and we need more stories like this told in film and mainstream film. And it's an enjoyable movie with lots of good acting. Paris in the 1920s, always good to look at. So I would... Did
it look anything like Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge set?
No. They were... Actually, they weren't so struggling artists. They were artists, but they lived a reasonably sort of austere kind of life.
I mean, anyone who's actually making a living as an artist is a wildly successful artist.
True. I think it was, back then there was probably a little bit more patronage for living as a professional artist than what there is today. You didn't have to Uber drive when you were an artist back then.
Plenty drove taxis, though.
So I would give this... I'm going to give it 3 stars.
Only 3?
Oh, no, I think 3 stars is a very acceptable rating.
Sounds transphobic to me.
No, it's not. Well, actually, No.
No.
I think actually the reason that I gave it 3 stars was that I felt as though it didn't perhaps maybe represent the transgender experience in the depth that it could have. It was a little superficial at times. That was probably my main problem with it.
Okay, I'm glad we've gotten to the bottom of that. So what's next?
Altered Carbon.
Altered Carbon. Now, I'm going to declare some biases here. I probably one of the last trilogies of books I bought in paper format, because I do all my reading on the Kindle app these days, was the Altered Carbon trilogy by Richard Morgan, the books. And I am a huge fan. I have bought every book Richard Morgan's ever written. And I have emailed Richard Morgan a few times. Now, it was legit, serious work issues, because I, as regular listeners will know, was a journalist for many years. And in particular, Richard Morgan put a blurb on someone else's book saying what a brilliant book it was. And I was writing a book review of this book, and I thought the book was appalling. And I actually emailed him, said, "There's this blurb. You say it's a great book. I don't feel it's a great book, and I'm really curious as to why this is the case." And he came back saying, "Look, I love the author. He's a great guy. His previous book was great. They asked me for a blurb. I said yes. I agree with you. The book is not great. The first 20 pages were great, and that was all I'd read by the time I put the endorsement on the book." And I said, "Can I use that in print?" And he said, "Absolutely." So my brief interactions with Richard Morgan, he has been extremely honest, open, and a very decent human being, and more decent than he needed to be. So I'm a fan of the guy in general.
Yep, that's pretty obvious. That was pretty obvious when we had to pause the TV show every 20 minutes so you could explain to me what did and didn't happen in the books. Yep. Which is a very annoying way to watch shows, I will tell you, listeners. But one of the best things about this show, I think I just got to get it out there. I've got to get it out there just straight up front.
Get the wang out.
You took it away from me!
Come on.
This show
Take the wang, own the
has
wang.
a lot of penis.
Yes. I mean, there is
It's great!
There's a lot of exploitation of women in it, and the hypersexualization.
Yeah, but I'm used to that. That just washed over me.
Yeah. But they did balance it out with a lot of wang.
There is a lot of wang. So James Purefoy actually has an entire Reddit thread dedicated to him called "Biggest Dick You've Ever Seen in a Mainstream Television Show."
Is it prosthetic?
There's a lot of debate about that online, but so I can't recall, but his penis has appeared in other shows,
Right.
and some people are saying no.
Not a prosthetic.
Not a prosthetic.
Because Billy Zane as Dr. Manhattan, I mean, it looked like a squid hanging between his legs in Watchmen. But
did Billy Zane play... I don't think Billy Zane played Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen.
do you want to Google that now? Or
Yeah, Google it now.
Okay, just bringing that up. Yep, Billy Zane, Dr. Manhattan. Thank you, IMDb.
Wow. Well, there wasn't really a lot of acting going on there. It was just... I thought that was just an entirely computer animated character. Billy Zane.
Alright, Billy Zane is big, giant. I mean, that thing's 50 foot long in Watchmen.
I'm guessing that's prosthetic.
Yeah, slaughtering Vietnamese peasants and just swinging it around.
I think there was a lot of things that were fake about that character in Watchmen. But anyway, there is a significant amount of penis, so, ladies, if you...
Just like looking at penises, there are probably dedicated websites that would serve you better.
Oh, there are. I Googled them in researching this show. There's a lot.
But okay, so the premise of the show, it's set in the pretty far distant future, and where human consciousness can be transferred and stored, and human bodies become what they just call sleeves, and the wealthy can live forever, which becomes problematic because at least at the moment they still die eventually, although Rupert Murdoch...
Rupert Murdoch is looking pretty good.
Although, Prince Philip looks like he's on his last legs, so, Not that I have anything against Prince Philip in particular. I probably have more respect for Prince Philip than a lot of other people.
And also his wealth probably pales in comparison to Rupert Murdoch's.
Oh, his personal wealth is nowhere near Rupert Murdoch's, yeah. But, I mean, you still think he's probably getting the best of medical care and, it's just getting old. Moving on from Prince Philip. So, in Altered Carbon, they really never touch, in either the books or the show, what's happened to royal families around the world when this new technology's arrived and there's no more succession. I mean, it's that's a whole other can of worms. And so there is transport. Now, this is going back to the books. They sort of touch on it but don't explain it very well in the show. But the world has transport between the worlds is faster than light. There's faster than light communication, so you can zap a consciousness between the stars, but you need to physically move things at slower than light speeds, which has some interesting effects. And in particular, the idea of the envoys and envoy training is that the hardware or even the body you've got is interchangeable and you have to deal with the situation you have in front of you. And it basically means that powers of the mind become paramount and skills of empathy and the idea of empathy even being a weapon is a kind of a nifty idea in this setting. And your ability to convince other people to join with you and make common cause with you is part of what drives the show. But as someone who hadn't read the books and was tediously bored by her boyfriend banging on about,
well, I did tell you to stop talking to me after about episode 2.
So what did you think?
I think the first half of this season is much better than the second, and I think because the introduction of all of these characters and this world is something that is really interesting and unique and you haven't seen on TV for a really long time. I think Joel Kinnaman as the main character is amazing. I loved him in The Killing. But I think the second half of the season, without giving away too many spoilers to anyone who hasn't watched it, starts to turn a little bit soap opera-y. There's quite a huge development between two of the characters.
There's a twist that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And because it's so central to the narrative, it really needed to be there at the front. So, yeah, there are some pacing issues, and that's something that was radically departed from the books, I would hasten to add as well. There's a little bit of what I loved in the books was that Kovac is a small wheel in a big world, and there's too much in the series of making him the centre of everything.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. I mean, he is the centre of this universe.
In the books, he's the centre of the story, but it's a big world, it's a big universe, there's lots of other things going on, and it's charting a story through a small part of that. Whereas I feel in the show, if I have a criticism of it, it's that there's too much of trying to make him central to the universe.
Well, you're really rooting for him. I mean, he is one of the few likeable characters in the entire series. You really want to get behind him.
His counterpart, Ortega, she's just delightful.
Yeah, I said one of the few.
Yeah, and also one of those... Kinnaman probably is a big enough name that it's just, that's Joel Kinnaman doing stuff, whereas she is Kristen Ortega. That character is so large that the actress is secondary to it.
Yeah. She's very good in it.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff, he just has he's this huge hulking guy with a lot of menace and a lot of danger to him. And there's just beautiful little scenes, like particularly where he's wearing this little pink unicorn backpack that he buys drugs in his first day in Bay City. And this huge, terrifying dude with his little pink unicorn backpack. It's just a beautiful little visual piece of humour that works in it. There's just a scene when he's been tortured and then he's got his gun out and he walks into a room and the door closes behind him. You're seeing just the set in his shoulders and then the screaming as the door closes. And mayhem is ensuing. And it's so well done to just suggest carnage without even having to show it, letting it all play out in our imaginations. So I guess, there's a lot of things to like in terms of its cinematic scope.
I did just say that this movie, this TV show looks amazing, and it does. Mm-hmm. But I am a little sick of this Blade Runner-esque future that we're all seeing in all of these representations. It's a little played out. Like, can we get something new? Is there something new out there,
Well, this
people?
is a cyberpunk book, and so it's given a cyberpunk look.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not coming at it from the books.
It's a genre setting. And yeah, the mirror... it was a whole scene of authors called the Mirror Shades crowd, led particularly by William Gibson, who were writing books in the early 80s. Now, admittedly, Richard Morgan wrote this in the late 90s, I think. So he was a second wave cyberpunk writer. But the whole gritty Neo-Tokyo thing is a pretty specific genre. Now, there's been a bit of it lately, and certainly the Blade Runner 2048, which we should probably talk about.
That is Blade Runner. Like, they're allowed to do Blade Runner.
Sure, but they didn't invent cyberpunk. They just put it on the screen for the first time. And actually, I have some problems with Altered Carbon in that it's trying to do cyberpunk, which is a near future look, in the year 2500 with technology that's radically reshaped humanity, and it's like, why is everything dirty and gritty? Why aren't why aren't the robots and the
I'm sure there's a
friggin'...
I mean, we got a Roomba that cleans our floors. I'm sure they get like one of those ones on the glass windows.
Yeah.
It's just not... I don't know, I'm a bit over it. It doesn't really represent to me the advancements that we've had in technology, and I think there's something a little bit... I think there could be more interesting representations of these futures.
Part of the show and the books is the representation of inequality, though. So up in the clouds...
Oh, yeah, but I mean, that's all...
Where the knobs live, everything's beautiful, but they basically need poor people, and this is an interesting idea, they need to have people living in poverty in their society that they can torture and hunt and feel superior to. And so they create poverty where it's needless, purely for their own enjoyment.
Yeah, but they could still have robots cleaning their windows.
The poor people's windows.
Yeah. It doesn't cost the rich people anything.
It depends how much moral superiority you require before you snuff someone for your own gratification.
Well, look, I'm just saying it's getting a little played out for me.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, Richard Morgan has a lot of interesting ideas about inequality and rampant wealth. His book Market Forces is a really interesting idea of the future of merchant bankers, written by someone who's obviously spent some time around merchant bankers. I'm getting the hurry up sign here.
You're doing that thing you were doing in those first 1 to 2 episodes.
It's because I like doing it.
No,
sure, just kill all the joy in my life.
That has to be edited out.
So, on that note, how many stars would you like to give it?
I'm going to go 4 stars. I did really enjoy, especially the first half of this season. Mm-hmm. I think it actually does give something new to the sci-fi genre. Mm-hmm. It's not entirely new to Blade Runner-y, but what do you do? And, lots of wang. In fact, maybe it should get an extra star for the wang.
Star for wang.
I'm just going to...
Does that take it to 5 stars?
No, I'm going to leave it at 4 stars.
3 star with a wang star.
I'm going to leave it at 4 stars.
Okay. See, I'm actually going to mark it a 3 star because I think if they'd stayed closer to Morgan's story, I think it would have been better in the long run. But I totally get that they had to make a show that they could get on television and that people would watch. So I understand why they made those decisions. I'm going to dock it a star for that and give it 3. So what's next?
Well, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't review The Royal Wedding.
Now, I haven't watched this one either on account of being at a beer show, getting a croaky voice.
I'm sure you've seen enough Twitter /
I've got some idea of some things that went down. So this was a fascinating wedding in that neither of the fathers of the participants were there.
John!
Scandalous! Scandalous. I do honestly feel that young Harry has a striking resemblance to a very good friend of his mother who is not his father.
That is not true. That has been...
What, you're saying there is no striking resemblance?
But that has been debunked. They didn't even know each other.
Yeah, they did.
No, they didn't.
They absolutely did. I knew guys who were in the barracks at Windsor Castle who were getting phone calls from Diana for James Hewitt while that was going on.
Are you trying to get us sued when we only have like 12 listeners? Because
we are not going to get
at
sued
least
for this.
The damages will be low.
We will not get sued for this. They are not going to give it creative oxygen.
Anyway.
Where did that red hair come from then?
back to the topic at hand.
The wedding.
The wedding. Now, I watched several TV coverages of this wedding, mainly because it's impossible just to sit and watch one because they were all slightly boring. Can I just say something about Annabelle Crabb? What happened to Annabelle?
Yeah, look, I knew Annabelle when she was cool.
She's just become very asinine.
And twee.
Yeah.
She's always been prone to being twee. But twee was cute when she was 20-something, and twee now is less cute.
Well, it's just getting a bit old, really, isn't it? Well, that's what you're saying, isn't it? Anyway, Annabelle, had to do the flick over to Channel 7.
Wow, you actually changed channel because Annabelle was too twee.
Well, actually, at one point she said, I'm going to stop talking now, and I thought...
Yeah, for the benefit of the international audience, Annabelle Crabb is an Australian TV personality who was once a very respected journalist and now wears pretty dresses and takes scones to ministers' houses for television. Yes.
She's sort of like a Martha Stewart, but she doesn't make anything.
Oh, she would hate that comparison so much.
Just Martha Stewart doesn't do hard-hitting interviews. Neither does Annabelle Craig. She's like Oprah, but less powerful.
Yeah, well...
No, she's not even like... No, she's a long way from Oprah. I don't know what she is. Anyway, royal wedding. Let's get back to it. The dress.
Yes.
What did you think of the dress, John?
I thought the dress was a triumph.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, managing to combine modern style in the body of the dress with a train that needed multiple page boys.
Oh my God, that little page boy! Have you seen those memes of him?
Face, yeah.
With that is just the best face ever.
Teeth. Yeah,
he rules. I love him.
He's going to be a counter in Earl at some point and spend his life on ski fields. So at least that picture will always be there, and all his friends will pass it around. So,
That's the best thing he's done.
It's the best thing he'll ever do.
Yes, I thought the dress was a little boring.
See, this is where minimalist style meets. I mean, what did you want, embroidery on it, or
just wanted to look for
it had to be white,
how much did that wedding cost?
36 million.
I need a bit of pizzazz on there. I need a bit of bling, a bit of something.
Well, they did fly in a liberation theologist to roast the audience with hellfire, so How much more bling did you need? Look, I think Meghan Markle, being, as they say in the trade, a commoner, could not take too many adventurous steps with the dress.
True. I still thought it was a little dull. Next, walking down the aisle. On her own halfway. Charles the other half.
Yeah, look, it's...
pretty revolutionary. Well,
halfway.
I don't know about revolutionary, actually. It might have been a bit of an overstatement.
Yeah, halfway revolutionary, I guess.
It's a step.
The whole... I mean, certainly it was not her father giving her away, so she wasn't being treated like a chattel.
Well, some dude still had to give her away, though.
Some dude just walked a bit down the aisle with her.
Yeah, but I mean, I think all of us feminists were dreaming she could go the whole aisle on her own. But we got to be put back in our place.
If you were to get married, would you deny your dad the opportunity to have his?
But she didn't have her dad. She had Harry's dad. She should have said no.
Yeah.
And I'd probably do both mum and dad.
Oh, that's always awful. There's not enough room in the aisle, and
I think there was enough room in the aisle there.
Yeah, maybe, but I when it's mum and dad doing the handover, I mean, that actually, I don't know. I don't like that in weddings. It's like the fat friend reading poetry. There's just,
but that literally happens at every wedding.
Yeah, I know, and I don't like that either.
All right, Reverend Curry.
Was that? Look, I haven't watched the wedding, but a lot of people who are saying, "Wow, this is amazing." It's like, you should go to church, because every Sunday, in most decent churches, and get some like Hillsong, the evangelicals are all like greed is good and are probably actually devil worshippers. But most...
Again, defamation suit waiting to happen there, but anyway.
I'm not referring to any individuals.
Okay. Hillsong will find a way, my friend.
in most churches, and if you were to read, there's this book called the Bible. You might have heard of it. The talk is often of the poor and having to be decent to people and loving each other and being serious about loving each other. Meaning, it might cost you. You might have to give up your second car so that someone can eat. So, what he was saying was not at all outrageous from a Christian theological perspective.
I don't think anyone's saying that. It was the way that he did it in such an animated way. That's what people are talking about.
Oh, well, he gave a speech that people are talking about, so the animation definitely paid off.
I just think that everyone's faces look like what normal people's faces look like in church.
When they're in the middle of someone's talking,
bored.
nothing's happening. I mean, this whole idea of, oh, what a big moment. You walk down an aisle, you say, I do or I will at the right moment, and, oh, look at you, success.
And everyone talking about Prince Philip and how, dour his face was. It's like the guy is ready to die.
Yeah, he's a dude in his 90s who's led a full life, and he's somewhere near the end of it.
And I think the Queen has probably seen a lot of different types of reverends give a lot of different types of
she actually
sermons.
Goes to church, I think, on a daily basis.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, I've seen it. I've been all over the world seeing this shit before.
Yes. There you go with the language again. But no, I agree with the point you're trying to make, which is that, yes, the Queen is not being shocked to hear such thoughts or ideas. She's exposed on a daily basis. It is somewhat interesting that the plutocracy of this planet might have been for one moment confronted with a contrary view, which they are not normally.
What was the contrary view, though?
Oh, the contrary view to the plutocracy, that you might need to care for the poor and...
But that's what they all talk about in church all the time.
Yeah, but the plutocracy don't go to church.
Oh, yeah, I see your point now.
Okay, cool.
I think all of those people, though, that went to that ceremony would go to church.
Who are in the hall?
In the front half.
Maybe.
Those ones that those poor buggers that had to stand in the back. Did you see them?
I don't think
they didn't get seats.
I don't think your actual dukes and earls are very religious.
You don't think they make an appearance once a month?
Not often. They don't have to. They inherited it. They it's they don't have to work for it. You're more likely to see an actual member of the royal family at a church service in the United Kingdom than you are to see the aristocracy. In my limited experience, but I have lived in the country, and my grandfather was a chaplain to the Queen, so I know a little bit about this. Although I'm not claiming to be an expert on it. So, how did you rate it as a show? As a show?
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? Because it's sort of one of those... You don't really see things like this that often. It's kind of like a 3 times in a lifetime kind of thing.
I did like the horse guard losing control of his horse.
Oh, I did like that too.
And the poor bloke knows there's a million cameras.
Was it the same? Because when they were started out with the little horse procession, I don't know what you call a horse procession.
A parade.
Parade. They said, oh, there's an inexperienced horse in there. I wonder if he'll be okay. Was it the same one? Or just a rogue one that got a bit uppity.
Working with children and animals.
Look, I'm a Republican. That Curry dude, though, he earns an extra star. I'm going to go 2 stars.
Yeah, wow.
Also, I didn't actually watch one channel's coverage. I watched like 5 of them.
Okay, so you were surfing.
Yeah.
It's also it's distressing. Like you see the top 10 stories for every news website in the world, and it's all royal wedding. And so the worst thing in modern media, and I've been here, is terrible editors who say, "Oh, that got a lot of clicks yesterday. I will write the same story again." Or I'll commission the same story again, and they just keep doing it till the hits drop off. Instead of saying, you know what, people read that story yesterday, we're going to find something new today. So the continuous, are they getting married? Yes, they are getting married. They're getting married. They've gotten married. They've gotten married. They got married yesterday. It's unnecessary. I really feel.
You mean much like this segment of the podcast?
Yeah, that was not my choice. Here we are talking about it, and I'm being given the finger. And on that note, I feel we'll say goodbye for the night. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you haven't already, please subscribe to us.
You didn't rate the wedding.
I didn't watch it. Please subscribe to this podcast. And also, let us know if there's any shows you'd like us to watch. And we'll think about it. On that note, good night from me.
Good night from me.